and we'll begin our presentation. I'm going to let Krystle kind of talk about herself and what she does, but she's a community scientist and a photographer, a very talented person. And she's dedicated her free time and a lot of personal energy into increasing our awareness of the decline of our native bee species. She has spent many hours in the Santa Monica Mountains, urban areas of LA, and throughout Southern California, documenting bees in their native habitats. And so this evening, she's going to share her screen with us and make her presentation. She was recently also, she did a very brief version of this presentation at the October California Native Plant Society conference. And so I'm hoping to see a bunch of beautiful pictures this evening. Thank you, Krystle.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm just gonna share my screen here. I don't know if you can see this.
Okay, I see. So now.
There we go. Is it full screen for everybody?
It's full screen for me.
Okay, I think that counts. All right, so yeah, again, thank you so much for that introduction. Again, my name is Krystle Hickman, and this is sort of a longer version of the presentation that I did in San Jose, California at the California Native Plant Society event up there. So just to tell you a little bit about myself, I am an artist, which you can see me creating some artwork up there. I'm also a speaker. You can see me on stage with the TEDx UCLA, and then also a photographer. As far as artwork goes, I create artwork with two different mediums. So these three, this one right here, Shadow Bozeman, and this is my friend at the bottom, those are all ballpoint pen pieces. And this art piece actually is made out of sugar. It's the one that got me the TED Talk. So I create artwork, also obviously give speeches, which is what I'm doing right now, as well as photograph bees. So what I photograph in relation to bees are the bees themselves, which you can obviously see in the upper right-hand corner here, the plants they visit, and also their ecosystems. Now I primarily do this in California, which you can see me up in a meadow here. This is in the Trinity Alps. And this year I just went to Belize. I was looking for a nocturnal bee there that I actually found. So very, very cool experience. So I consider myself a community scientist. A lot of people would refer to this as a citizen scientist. So it's pretty much the exact same definition. It's someone who is an amateur scientist who conducts scientific research in a field that they don't hold a degree in. So I call myself a community scientist instead of a citizen scientist because citizen in the US, in the English speaking world, the meaning of it has started to change a lot. So instead of someone who doesn't hold a degree in what they're studying, it can mean whether or not they're documented. So community is a lot more inclusive. So that's why a lot of people in the United States are using it. So again, what I do is I photograph bees and their environments. I also do things like document their behavior. I notate the plants they're on and then keep track of things like times, dates, and weather. So I actually have an Excel sheet that I update every single year for every single location I visit, just to keep track of like what's happening. It's also a really easy way to see what's happening with like climate change and with just to see when bees are showing up, if they're changing year after year. Okay, so how I got started, I'm sure some of you guys have seen this quote before. If the bee disappeared off the surface of the globe, then man would only have 4 years of life left. No more bees, no more pollination, no more plants, no more animals, no more man. That's attributed to Albert Einstein. So I saw this on Facebook, and I, like a lot of other people, thought this was a real quote. And I fully believed it for a little bit longer than I'd like to admit. It's always good to fact check. But yeah, so I believe this quote was true. I also believe that Einstein said it. He actually didn't. This quote was made up in the 90s. But since I believed it was true, I also believed it was about honeybees, because there's a lot of times there's pictures of honeybees right alongside this quote. So I went out and I was like, I'm going to save the bees, and specifically honeybees. So I just took pictures of bees, a lot of just honeybees, just a lot of pictures of honeybees. And then I took this photo, and it's obviously a bee, but it's not a honeybee. And I was kind of wondering, okay, this is interesting. What is this? So I had made friends with a lot of beekeepers, and I was like, you guys are the bee experts. Let me ask you what it is. And none of them knew. I ended up going back online. I ran into this group about native bees, which was a term I'd never heard before. And it was in that group where I met people called melittologists, which are bee experts or bee scientists. And they identified this bee right away as a female andrina. And one thing they also told me was that it is native bees that are potentially threatened or endangered, not honeybees. So this kind of made me reevaluate everything I was doing, because I spent a lot of time on honeybees, and I ended up going back to a lot of the locations I visited before to find these bees. But for whatever reason, I wasn't able to find them. I just kept finding honeybees. And that was until the Crescent Farm. Crescent Farm is about an acre of native landscaping at the LA Arboretum. The horticulturalist took pictures of some of the native bees present. He saw about 4 native bees all in one day. And someone posted them on the LA Arboretum's Facebook page. So I saw that and I was like, okay, there's something here that's interesting. Let me check out this garden. So I ended up going to the garden, and the first day that I was there, I took these photos, which was more photos of native bees than I'd taken months before. And the reason why became pretty obvious after I was at the garden. It was the native plants. So native plants attract native bees. So yeah, this was a really big revelation for me. So also want to get into a couple of differences between honeybees and native bees, because I know there's a little bit of confusion with this. So first off, honeybees are not threatened or endangered. Native bees are potentially threatened or endangered. Honeybees, the ones that are in the US, are from Europe. Native bees are from where they currently reside. So just like native plants, they could be native to the entire United States. They could be native to just California, or even just your zip codes, because some ecosystems are very, very small. Honeybees drink water provided by people. Native bees get all of their hydration from plants, so you don't need to put any water sources out for them. Honeybees are generalist pollinators, which means they'll try and pollinate everything. And a lot of people think this is a really good thing because they're trying to pollinate everything, but because they don't have these specialized relationships with plants, they're also not that great of pollinators. The pollination rate of honeybees is said to be about 5%, so that's pretty low. Native bees can also be generalist pollinators like honeybees, but they can also be specialist pollinators. Sometimes they'll pollinate just one family or species of plants. Honeybees also are detrimental to native bees. I'll get into that a little bit more later, but one of the things is just because so many of them are around urban areas where people are gardening, there's a lot less diversity of plants because of just humans coming in. And honeybees have been known to spread deformed wing disease to bumblebees. So deformed wing disease comes from varroa mites that are in a honeybee colony. And not all honeybees are physically affected by this. Some of them are just carriers. So what they'll do is they'll go to the flora that's in your neighborhoods, and they'll actually infect the pollen on the plants. And then a bumblebee will come along, pick up that pollen, and pollen is used to feed baby bees. So the developing bees will consume this infected pollen, and then they'll have the smaller wings as well. So if you ever see those videos, I've seen a lot of them shared online of people saving these bumblebees with small wings, it's because of that. Also, native bees, I'll get into this a little bit more, but they're also threatened by climate change. Honeybees live in colonies. Native bees, about 70% are ground nesting. 30% are cavity nesting, and about 90% are solitary. Okay, so specialist pollinators. So this is a really cool bee. This is the very first specialist pollinator I ever found. So this is a Perdita masuda, and it can always be found on this buckwheat in xeric regions of like the Mojave Desert. I found this one in Death Valley or Joshua Tree. So what's really cool about this bee is pretty much everything on this plant was the same color of yellow. So you could kind of tell that everything evolved together, which I just thought was really cool. And another thing that's really cool about this bee is the way a lot of bee sampling is done right now, or bee identification, it's through collecting. So people will put out a pan trap and they'll just, bees will basically perish in the ethanol or whatever the liquid is in there, and people will study them that way. But the way I do things is just through photography. So the very first time I was out there, I know it's kind of hard to tell what's happening in this photo, but no one actually knew, let me go back here. No one knew what this facial feature on the male was for because of the way everyone was collecting them. No one is actually watching them. So if you see here, the male's in the back, he's actually trapping the female from flying away by grabbing her antennas and putting it on either side of his little duck face. So, yeah. And then also these are some of the other creatures that were on that plant. And if you notice, they're all really similar in coloration. So I just think that's really cool how everything kind of evolved together. This is another specialist pollinator. And this one's really interesting because this bee is actually the easiest way to identify it is by the plant that it's on. Pretty much whenever you see a photo of this bee, it's always on this flower. So if you want to look for the bee, go out into the desert, look for a desert dandelion, you'll find this bee. And that leads me to this bee, which is called the Perdita minima. So the other bee, which is a Caliopsis that we saw back here, this one was the one that first encouraged me to look for bees by first looking for the plants. So this bee has a symbiotic relationship with spurge or white margin sand gnat. So you look for that plant in xeric regions in the Southwest, and you might potentially find this bee. So Perdita minima is the smallest known bee in North America, potentially the smallest bee in the world. So they're about 2 millimeters. So this is the female right here in the upper picture. The lower picture is the male. And just for size reference, I put the flower that they're on a quarter. So if you look at the flower right here, this is a little bit larger than the bee. So the bee is smaller than the letter on a quarter. And one also really interesting thing about this location is if you go to a lot of desert regions, things are smaller. That applies to the bees as well. So this bee is called Elacioglossum dialectus, and it's known as being one of the most difficult, I'd say, bees to ID to species. Most people just ID it to its subgenus, which is Dialectus. But what's really cool about this one is I feel like with more people getting into community science and with cameras getting better, people can take pictures of living specimens. And this one was actually able to be ID'd to species because of this photo and a few others. Another thing I want to say about this, this ecosystem, it's really small. It's about 2 feet by 2 feet, but all of these creatures lived on it. So ecosystems, a lot of times people would think of it as like an entire desert, but it could just be this little patch of plants. And this was on a sidewalk in a neighborhood. So all of these creatures live there. So you have the world's potentially smallest bee. And also this creature in the center here, this is really cool. So this is a mite. It's called a Paratarsodomus macropalpus, and it is the fastest land animal on Earth relative to its size. So if it was the size of a human, it'd run about 1,300 miles an hour. And it's only 0.5 to 0.7 millimeters, so also very, very tiny. And then also symbiotic relationships exist outside of bees as well. This is an example of a wasp that you'll always find on a California brittle-bush. And again, it's ID'd because of the plant that it's on. But also symbiotic relationships exist outside of the insect world. So this is a sea anemone, which is I guess the animal outside here, and then also the clownfish, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. So this is a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. because the clownfish attracts food for the sea anemone, but the clownfish gets protection from the sea anemone. Sea anemone, it's not attacked by other creatures that might want to eat it because the sea anemone can sting or potentially paralyze other creatures. And then I know this sounds kind of random because this is a talk about bees, but I really like to bring this up because this is an example of what's happening with climate change and symbiotic relationships. So in 2019, 2020, there was a really large oceanic temperature gradient that affected Eastern Africa as well as Australia. So what it did was sucked a lot of moisture out of the Australia area, drought. There was a lot of fires there. I know this wasn't on the news a lot, but East Africa had giant, just intense floods at the exact same time. So it impacted the symbiotic relationship in Australia because a lot of the eucalyptus leaves or eucalyptus plants burnt, and koalas only eat eucalyptus leaves. So what happened to the koalas that survived the fire? A lot of them ended up starving to death. And I bring this up because I feel like the world got together and was like, we want to save the koalas. They're really cute. They're really fluffy. But the same thing's happening close to home in California in the Santa Monica Mountains. And because a lot of times people don't think of insects as cute and fluffy little creatures or like bees, they just think of bees as like something that'll sting you. People are ignoring these symbiotic relationships. And the same thing is happening close to home. So what can we do? There's a lot of things we can do. But I think the two easiest things that everyone can do is one, document to raise awareness. Just look in your yard, on your hikes, wherever you're going, just observe around you. You can also plant native plants in your yard or encourage your neighbors or your friends to do the same thing. So one way that I think is really easy to document to raise awareness is just with your phone. There's an app that I'm sure a lot of you guys use already called iNaturalist. Everyone has their phone with them all the time. Just go out, take pictures of things, upload things to iNaturalist. It's so easy now for community scientists to make discoveries, especially on the West Coast, because I feel like there's not enough people looking because we're in a biodiverse hotspot here. I also created 2 bee projects. One is called California Native Bees. There's also one called Los Angeles Native Bees. You can look at these 2 bee projects on iNaturalist and see what native bees are in your area. It's also a great way to see what bees you might want to attract to your yard. And I'll get into plants that have a relationship with these bees in a second as well. So this also brings me to Arlington Garden. Really great garden in Pasadena if you haven't been there. So this bee on the right is a Xylocopa sonorina. He's a male carpenter bee. And I still haven't seen this bee since 2018. I thought this bee was no longer present at the garden, but in 2021 and pretty consistently after, Arlington Garden started holding nature walks. So other people saw this bee, and this was actually the first photo that I know of that someone got of this bee since 2018. And this is just an example of there needs to be more people out there looking, because if it was just me, I might say, hey, this bee is no longer present. But when there's more people out looking, we can make more contributions. So I just think it's really great. And the Santa Monica Mountains, which I'm sure a lot of you guys have spent a lot of time in. One thing I want to mention about the Santa Monica Mountains is you can actually, you'll actually be aware of what bees are present by what flowers are present. So this is a morning glory. And when you start to see morning glories, this is one of the bees that you'll see. So this is called the Diadacia bituberculata. It's a ground nesting bee. This is a female. The males actually sleep in the morning glories. It's really cool. So the morning glories actually open and close with the sun. So right before the sun starts to go down, the males will climb into the flower and the flower will close around them. When the sun starts to rise again, the flower will open again and the male bees will come out. So you can see a male and female here continuing their species. What's really cool about these bees too, if you go to, let's see, Satwiwa Canyon or Mishimoqua, the trailhead parking lot, sometimes it's just completely full of these guys. So the females actually create these little chimneys called turrets. And this is a female who didn't get all the way in her turret because she's got the pollen from the morning glory completely covering her back legs. So maybe she can't fit in all the way, but really cute photo, so I decided to include that. Hopefully this plays. So this is Mishimoku Trailhead parking lot. This is a huge aggregation of these bees. It was filmed in 2020 by my friend James, who has retired, and he spends about 3 months out of every year for the past 4 or 5 years just documenting these bees. It's really cool. But yeah, huge aggregation. And what's really cool about these bees, you can walk among them, they won't sting you. They can sting, but they don't. So another couple of bees that will show up also when you see the morning glories. This is a male Eucera bee. He's a longhorn bee. You can tell because he has the really long antennas. This is a Diphoria bee sleeping in one of the morning glories as well. So 2 other flowers to look out for are deerweed and California brittlebush, or maybe plants in the sunflower family. So when you start to see these 2 flowers, you'll actually start to see these bees. So we have Anthophora. This is a female. This is a male. You can tell he's a male because he has this facial feature. It's called clipeus. So females don't have that. He also has these little fans on his legs. This is a Habropoda, which looks a lot like an Anthophora, has the facial feature again, clipeus. And this is a female Hoplites. And again, she's on one of the California brittle bushes. This is a really cool bee. This is a bee called the Brachymelectica californica. You also have a male leaf cutter bee. Yeah. And then you also have, this is another Hoplites bee. You can see she's carrying pollen on her underside of her abdomen right here. This is a male Osmia bee, which is a really common bee that people have in their backyards. You can tell it's the male because he has a very hairy face and also very long antennae. And what's really cool too about this Brachymelectica californica bee, so this is a kleptoparasitic bee, or a cuckoo bee. So if you're familiar with like the cuckoo bird, this bee, the females don't collect pollen. What they'll do is they'll go into the burrow of another bee, they'll lay an egg in there, that egg will hatch, it'll consume the egg or the larva of the host bee, as well as the pollen that the other bee provisioned for its young. So this is really cool. And then also one thing that was awesome about this is if you see bees on maybe like one of the plants in your yard, this bee actually is disguised to look like bird poop. So a lot of things, a lot of insects or small creatures in your yard do look a lot like bird poop. So maybe take a look closer, maybe not too close at that bird poop because it might be one of these bees. So climate change close to home. This is a picture of the Santa Monica Mountains last year in July. Very, very dry. And one thing that's really interesting about this area is, again, it's a biodiversity hotspot. A lot of people are moving into there. So that is contributing to a lot of land loss for animals, but also because climate change and everything heating up or getting drier, there are more fires. So what a lot of people who reside in the Santa Monica Mountains have done is they've asked the certain conservancies to do fire abatement. So this is actually one of the areas that I visited very regularly up until last year. And I don't have any pictures of what it looked like beforehand. I wasn't expecting them to come through and like basically cut down all of the flora. But yeah, I was really sad that the tractors came through and basically took everything down, because this was actually a location where I had photographed about 40 different species of bees. And after they took everything down, I didn't see any other species of bees. So these are a couple of the bees that were once at this location. Just a couple of the 40 species. And I was very hopeful that this year the bees would come back. So I started coming back again in like March, just looking. I did see some of the mallows regrowing. I did see some of the morning glories regrowing. But the Conservancy, again, I guess, was asked to come through with the bulldozer again, and they cut everything down. So this is an example of what's happening in the Santa Monica Mountains right now. So it's not just a loss of flora, it's also a loss of insect life. And this article, I think this is a really great article. It came out early this year, March, in the New York Times. So this is a biodiversity map of the United States. And if you see here over on the left, California is deep, deep red. So we are a biodiversity hotspot. And for an example of how that reflects with bees, in the United States, there's 4,000 species of bees. In California, there's 1,643 recognized species of bees currently. So that's a very big percentage. And just to kind of zoom into this a little bit more, what's really great about this is it's a map that details a lot of animals that a lot of people normally look at, but it also includes bees and butterflies, fish, mussels, crayfish, flowering plants, a lot of other things like that. So I think this is a really, really great biodiversity map because it includes a lot of creatures that just people don't normally look at. So right now, about 10% of the United States is permanently protected, but the Biden administration set a goal to conserve and restore about 30% of the United States, the lands and the waters by 2030. So it's known as the 30 by 30. So fingers crossed that that happens. And this is also really nice. I'm just going to read it because I feel like they worded it really well. But it's essential for our collective long-term health that caution preempts short-term profit when addressing city-owned open space in the Santa Monica Mountains. So they're basically recognizing that undeveloped city lands, and this is from the California, the local city council for the Santa Monica Mountains. They're recognizing that city-owned lands of any side, such as hillsides, let us all breathe, and that this land has an inherent and immediate value to the environment and a long-term benefit of both wildlife and human populations. So I think it's really great that the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy is going out of their way to see the value, the inherent value of the mountains, not just what it can do for people, but to protect the environment. So we'll see what happens with that, but I think it's really positive. Also just want to show you an example of Anza Borrego, which is, I think, about maybe 3.5, 4 hours south, San Diego County. So this is an area I visit a lot. And what's really cool, so this is a bee that I photographed in Anza Borrego, and this is the only known living specimen of this species. So this species has only been collected, I think 2 specimens have been collected post-2000. So it's a very rare bee. And what's really cool about this bee is, so I didn't know this was a really rare bee. And I was actually out, I think it was maybe like 100 degrees on this day. And when I got back home and ID'd it with my friend, James Hung, who's also a melittologist, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go out again, photograph this bee. But it was in July, and it turned out that entire week, the temperature was around 110 every single day. And this is in the middle of a drought. So the plant that it's normally on normally looks like this. So this is a smoke tree, really, really beautiful tree. This is what it looked like when I was there, when it still should have been flowering a lot. So basically after an entire week of like 110-degree weather, I go back 7 days later. That day it hit 117 degrees. So it was very hot outside. There were only 2 of these bushes / trees still flowering at this level. And when I got out, came to the tree, there was just this very, very loud hum. And keep in mind, this is the middle of nowhere. And as I was approaching the tree, I just saw that it was surrounded and swarming with honeybees. And the week prior, I had seen maybe a little bit more than 100, I would say, native bees, Serratina and Megachile bee, like you saw before. But on this day, I only saw 1. And I was really disappointed with that. And it's just something that's happening a lot, is even in the middle of nowhere, honeybees are coming in. And when drought is basically happening to the ecosystem as well, there's less flowering, and the honeybees will just kind of rob the resources from these plants, and they'll leave less for the native creatures. But thankfully, and this wasn't even on the forecast, it rained at like 6 a.m. And when it did, I was walking around the 2 trees, and I saw this is the only Mega Kylie brownie. I saw that entire day. She was drying herself off in the rain. So I'm happy for like 2 seconds. There was a double rainbow, but I got beautiful photos of her. So yeah. And also native landscaping. So just a little bit about native landscaping. I'm going to talk about the watershed approach. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this already, but what is a watershed approach? A land area that drains to a common waterway, such as a stream, lake, estuary, wetland, aquifer, or even the ocean. So basically water runs downhill and collects. So there's 3 principles of it. And this photo is actually a really good example of it. So build healthy living soil that is biodiverse and has developed a structure like a sponge. So it'll hold a lot of water. And biodiverse means that there's a lot of different creatures in there to create a healthy ecosystem. So that could be things like earthworms, bacteria, arthropods, fungi, etc. Also treat rainwater as a resource. We're coming into the 4th year of a drought. This is a great way to preserve water. So again, you have the water that, the soil that kind of holds like a sponge. And you can also see this land area is a little bit elevated. So these are hugels. So they're higher elevations, mounds where you can put your plants on. People will put wood in there. I've even seen some people use cardboard. But yeah, so, and also another really great thing to do is rain barrels. So if you have these in your yard, about an inch of rain can give you a couple 100 gallons of water. So you could store that to water your plants during drought times. Yeah, and then a really good thing about this too, also you plant native flora. So if flora is already native to where you live, it is designed to be in the ecosystem. So if it's really hot, if it's dry, those plants are designed to be there. So they're more likely to survive longer. What that means for very long-term drought, I don't know. But yeah, there's definitely things you can do in your yard to help save the plants. This is my friend Paloma's yard. She posted this on Instagram and I just thought it was beautiful. I was like, you know what, I have to go to your yard and see what's there. So I actually go to a lot of people's yards and just to photograph the bees. But yeah, the first day I was there, I saw all of these bees. So what we have up here is a female carpenter bee. So this is the bee that burrows into wood. We have a female agapostemon bee, which is a green bee, and see she collects pollen on the back of her legs. This is a male osmia bee. Again, he has the facial hair and the really long antennas. And this is a Halictus farinosus, which is a sweat bee. So saw all of these bees on the first day I was there. And actually I've gone back a couple of times and I think I've seen about 15 or 16 species. But what's really cool about her yard too, is she has this bee. So this is called a Perdita interrupta. And what's really cool about this bee is it's very rare. So it's a specialist on a poppy. And if you're at all familiar with poppies, poppies don't produce nectar. So this bee has a symbiotic relationship with 2 plants. It collects pollen from the poppies and it collects nectar from Cryptanthia, or the popcorn plant. So I've only seen this bee in 2 locations. One is in Paloma's yard and the other one is at Theodore Payne, where I just saw one very briefly, but Paloma has a huge population of this bee. And it's also only present as an adult for about 1 month. So this is a bee that you'll see, I think it's March or April. I can't remember which one, but very, very short lifespan as an adult. Another bee that she has in her yard that's really cool. So this photo I actually took at the Crescent Farm at the LA Arboretum, but she also took a photo as well. So this is one of the 4 endangered bumblebees in California. This is a Bombus crotchii. So not only does Paloma have a rare bee, she also has an endangered bee in her yard. So this is really great what you can do with an ecosystem in your own backyard. And I'm sure a lot of you guys know this already, but maintaining a native environment, you're less likely to need things like pesticides or herbicides because this is a self-sustaining environment. And the thing about pesticides and herbicides is they actually kill more than just their intended targets. So pesticides are meant to kill insects, but what happens for some reason if you don't like that bee, for example, that I just showed you before, the Perdita interrupta, what would pollinate the poppies? For whatever reason, let's say you don't like poppies and you put the herbicides in your yard. What happens to the Perdita interrupta? So it impacts more than just the intended target. So I'm going to show you some insects that I like to call indicator insects. So if you have these in your yard, they indicate that you have a healthy biodiverse ecosystem because they rely on other creatures to survive. So this is called a brachioid wasp. This is a male. And a lot of people actually don't notice they have this one in their yard because it's really, really tiny. Here he is right next to the quarter. So very, very tiny creature. So this is him at Arlington Garden in Pasadena. So this creature's life cycle relies on aphids, which a lot of people consider pests. And they're like, oh, I hate aphids in my yard. Let's kill them all. Let's get rid of them. But if you have a healthy biodiverse ecosystem, part of it is having these creatures that we consider pests in the yard. So the way the life cycle of this wasp works is the females will actually do something called ovipositing, or they'll poke a little egg inside the aphid. And the aphid's body swells up to look like this. It becomes a mummy. And then the wasp develops inside of the aphid, and then it ecloses or it exits the aphid. And if you ever see these swollen aphids with a little cap in the back here, you know that you have the wasps controlling the population of aphids. So really cool insect. Another one that I absolutely love, these lace wings. So another indicator insect. Here's the egg. And all of these I photographed at the Crescent Farm. This is the larva, and this is the adult at the bottom. So again, egg upper left, larva at the right, adult at the bottom. So these will control the populations of aphids as well. Also mealybugs, also thrips, a lot of other creatures that you wouldn't necessarily want in your yard, but are part of the ecosystem. And this is a thrips up close. And what's really cool about this too is, so that wasp, the aphids, the thrips, I'll photograph these on a single patch of sunflowers. So again, it shows that ecosystems can be really small. So I think that's really cool. And then flowers that you can have in your yard to attract these. So there's a lot of flowers, but I just decided to pick ones that I thought you guys would be the main ones. So we have buckwheat here, one of the very many species of buckwheats. And we also have the salvia or sage here. So these plants will attract a lot of generalist pollinators, as well as plants in the sunflower family. So sunflowers are a great flower for sleeping bees. These are male longhorn bees. I think they got soaked with a sprinkler here, but they're actually sleeping on sunflowers, and you'll see them returning to the same sunflower night after night. So it's really cool to observe these guys. And I photographed this at the Crescent Farm too. Another photo from the Crescent Farm. You have the poppies here. Poppies will attract a lot of specialist pollinators, but they'll also attract generalist pollinators. And then this is the popcorn plant that I was talking about before, or the cryptantha that again attracts the Perdita interrupta. And this is a male that I actually photographed at Theodore Payne. One thing that's really cool about the males, you could tell it's a male again because it has the clipeus facial feature, but the males spend their entire adult life on these poppies. So they basically spend their entire time there just waiting for a female to come and just like mate with her. So I just think it's really funny. That's a close-up of a male as well. Another plant is a mallow, and you can actually see a bee in here. So Diadacia bees is the bee that actually sleeps inside of a mallow. So a mallow is another flower that opens and closes with the sun. So the males will sleep in there, the females will collect pollen from there. So this is an example of a male. This is right as the sun was coming up, the flowers opening, you can see him coming, looking out. This was in the Mojave Desert in California City. This is a female. You can tell she's a female because she has all of this pollen on her back leg there. Another flower that you can have in your yard is a squash flower. So you'll attract, these bees used to be called Pepinapis prunosa, but they're Pepinapis now changed to a subgenus. So now they're called Bucera, which is a longhorn bee again. But yeah, the males spend all of their time in the squash flowers. The females are ground nesting, and this is a really early morning bee. So as soon as the sun comes up, these flowers open, you'll see a whole bunch of the males. Really cute. So yeah, this is the male. You can see the little clippius right here. This is a female. See, she doesn't have that. Redbud, that's a great flower to have in your yard. So this is a really good flower for megachile bees, which is the leaf cutter, but also a lot of carpenter bees. So this is a leaf cutter carrying a rolled up leaf back to her burrow. So if you ever see the redbud leaves with these little cutouts here, this is what the female leaf cutter bees cut. They'll actually line their nest with this and separate their the cells in their nest with that as well. And then I think I just included this picture just to show you that this is a female because she has all of this. It's called plumose hair. It's branched hair. It kind of looks like a bird's wing, so it holds a lot of pollen on there. Also, again, the carpenter bees. So this is a male and a female of the Xylocopa sonorina. So they're sexually dimorphic, so they look really different. Also plant stems. So these are really important in your yard. So about 30% of bees are cavity nesting. They nest in plant stems or holes in wood. So if you have a plant in your yard that has a pithy stem, instead of maybe taking all of it out, leave about 12 to 18 inches and you created a nice hole for like a carpenter bee. So this is a small carpenter bee called a Seratina. But yeah, they live in those. It's really cute. So these are more Seratina. You can see the male here because of the clippius facial feature. He has like 3 segments to it here. She just has one, and she also has the plumose hair on her back leg. Bouteloua gracilius, or tall grass, another really, really great plant to have in your yard. So this is a great plant for sleeping male bees, but also sleeping wasp, which I know a lot of people like, oh, I don't like wasp, but wasp will use these as well. And actually bees are wasps. So yeah. But yeah, these are some bees that will sleep on them. These are, again, the Melittology longhorn bees. So they sleep on these. They also sleep on the sunflowers. These are Anthophora bees. They also like to use Bouteloua gracilius, but with this one, I think they're sleeping on a flax bush. So until they're gripping their mandibles, that's how they hold on. So this is a bee that a lot of times people think is a wasp because not all bees are fluffy. This is a nomada bee, and it's a kleptoparasitic bee or a cuckoo bee, just like the Brachymolectica showed you before. And I think, yeah, this is a male. And again, he's sleeping by gripping his little mandibles on some tall grass. Penstemon, another great flower to have in your yard. You'll actually find some male bees sleeping in these. So this is a male Halictus bee, Halictus farinosus. And when I actually moved the flower to get a good photo of him, he kind of got scared. He sat on the top here. So it kind of looks like he's surfing a wave. I thought it was a really cute shot. So just decided to include that. Megachile parhita, also sleeping on tall grass. This is a really great, so I guess an idea from the Xerces Society, which is leave the leaves. So leaves provide valuable organic matter to build healthy soil. So they're also really healthy, diverse ecosystem. They also work to suppress weeds and moisture retention, but they're also really good for overwintering creatures like bumblebees, butterflies. So queen bumblebees are actually born at the end of their season, which is normally like late fall, early winter maybe. So they actually live underground by themselves until spring arrives. So the leaves on the ground basically provide a blanket for them to keep them warm, stop them from freezing. So in your yard, if you'd like, it'd be really great if you left the leaves to help the next generation of bees, butterflies, wasps, or whatever. So plant stems, I think I put that in there twice. Okay, so this is really cool. So Wee Bee House is one of my favorite bee houses. So personally, I'm not a big fan of bee houses because I feel like a lot of times people get them so they can observe bees, but they don't spend a lot of time cleaning them out. Also, a lot of bee houses aren't actually designed appropriately for bees. Like they need to be at least 6 inches deep. But if you check out Wee Bee House, WEEBEE House, they've actually designed houses specifically to be able to be cleaned. So just to explain that, they actually sent me one. Really, really nice people, by the way. So I know a lot of people probably aren't aware of this, but cavity nesting female bees can actually control if they're laying a male or female egg. So they'll lay the, this is one of the cutouts from the bee house, but they'll lay the males closer to the entrance and the females closer to the back. So the males will actually emerge first and the females will emerge later. So with these, you can actually just kind of take them apart and they give you tools to clean them out. And then also at the top of the bee house, so you don't have to put them back in the burrows in whichever order, because it can be confusing which one's male or female. They provide this little cubby where you can actually just kind of put them all back in there, and then they will emerge whenever they do emerge. And yeah, so I also wanted to talk about, this is a bee brick. So this is one of those products that is designed for bees, but very badly designed. So like I was saying before, they need to be at least 6 inches deep. This one is about 4 inches. Also, there's no way to clean it out. Another thing about this is they were saying you should put this really high, which is probably the best thing about this, because if you put it so high, bees won't actually access it or try to use it. So it's not appropriate for bees. So why is it not appropriate? What happens? If you can't clean your bee houses out, this is what can potentially happen. So these are called pharoic mites. They don't actually harm the bees physically by like trying to suck nutrients from them. Some mites do, but these will actually, if they build up for a long time, it actually can prevent the bees from being able to fly. And it transfers from bee to bee a lot of times during their mating or going in and out of the unclean bee houses. So really good to get a bee house that you can clean. And I'll leave this up for a second. So these are instructional videos for if you do have a bee house. They give you like very good details on how to clean them out, disinfect them, and also recognize what species it is that you have in your house. Because a lot of bee species or genera will actually have maybe 2 or maybe even 3 generations in a season. Some of them will only have 1. So it's good to know. Okay. And then last thing, I mentioned this briefly, but you don't need to put water out for bees, for native bees. So I just gave you like a few examples of photos of people putting out water for bees. And if you're like slightly familiar with identifying bees, you can tell that these are all honeybees. So you're basically creating a resource for honeybees. You're encouraging more honeybees to be in your yard, not native bees. So again, more honeybees, just a lot of honeybees. So this is a native bee. This is actually my hand. So if you do find a native bee that is dehydrated, so my friend actually had this in her house, trapped in between window panes, and she was scared of it. So she was waiting for me to come over. So if you do want to give something to revitalize a bee, one, never give them honey. If you have honeybees, you could potentially give them honey if you knew what hive it came from. Otherwise, you might be like spreading viruses between bees. But with native bees, you need to give them a mixture of 3 parts water, 1 part sugar. And this is a carpenter bee just licking up some of my hand. And less than 5 minutes, she flew away. She was really good. Okay, so just want to get into some of my goals. One of my big goals is to photograph the 4 endangered bumblebees in California. I photographed one of them. I went to the Trinity Alps last year to try and get number 2. Didn't work out. That was a bee that actually hasn't been seen since August 2006. So it might actually be extinct. It wasn't even listed as an endangered species until last year, which I think is kind of crazy. Also encourage more people to get into community science because there's 1,643 recognized species in California. It would be great if when people think of bees, they thought of more than just honeybees. Also promote native landscaping bridges. So like my friend Paloma's house, what happens if she moves and the people who move into the house decide they don't want a native garden? Where are those bees going to go? So if her neighbors had maybe even just like a small patch of this native landscaping, these bees would have little places to keep traveling. Also working on finishing a coffee table book in 2023. I'm releasing some bee flashcards. This is a little preview of what they look like in the lower right-hand corner. And then I want to leave you guys with this. So if this kind of, this presentation encouraged you all or kind of expanded on your love for bees, this is a PBS special called My Garden of 1,000 Bees. So a man who is a documentary filmmaker has a native plant garden in England in his backyard. I think he lives in Bristol. He just hung out in his garden during quarantine and made this documentary. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. So if you have a chance to watch it, it's completely free. Definitely check it out. It's so wonderful. So yeah, so much.
Great. Do we want to, I have a few questions that people have done in the chat. Do you want to unshare and then we can, actually, we already have somebody with a raised hand. So Charles, you raised your hand. You want to ask a question?
I did. Krystle, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate it. I saw the CNPS presentation as well, so I almost thought, well, maybe I don't need to see this, but you had a lot more nuance and detail, and I enjoyed it very much. So thank you for your advocacy. So I have a question for you, get your opinion on. I'm involved with a space called Westwood Greenway, which is in West LA. It's about 3.5 acres of habitat that we've restored, and CNPS people were involved in that all the way back 15 years ago. And the plants just went in 2 years ago. And this summer we had a wonderful appearance of a lot of native bees that we'd never seen before, which was really wonderful. And especially the mallow-loving digger bees, they were all over the apricot mallow that we had there. I know they're very seasonal, and I know they're just summer phenomena, spring and summer phenomena in general. But we now have, in the last 2 months, 4 different hives of honeybees that have taken residency in the Greenway. And I know this time of year, they're probably the only bees we would see anyway. So maybe I'm wrong on that. Correct me if I'm wrong. If maybe they've driven out native bees already and I don't realize it, because they're native bees that should be there this time of year that I'm not aware of. Or, and additionally, I'd also like quickly your opinion, should we get those colonies removed?
So a lot of this is just opinion. Well, actually, I start out with what's not opinion first. So there are bees that are present all year round, and those are typically sweat bees. So like the Lasioglossum dialectus bees, you'll see all year round. We're starting to see bumblebees all year round, but that's because of the drought. So it's sort of changed their phenology. So you might still see some of those as well as some carpenter bees. As far as how the honeybees are impacting the native bees, I guess it depends on the amount of space and the diversity of flowers around. But typically, yes, they do drive out the native bees. What I would personally do is call a honeybee, I guess, collector, because there's a lot of honeybee farms here. They'll actually come and pick up them if you don't want them destroyed, and they'll maybe farm them somewhere else. Because yes, when the flowers do start blooming again, they will overrun things. I guess like a side note on that is there are certain plants that honeybees do not pollinate. So those plants, these are plants that require like a tomato or like a nightshade plant that require buzz pollination, because honeybees don't buzz pollinate. So if you do have a lot of those plants, if you have like a farm there as well, you might be okay. But personally,
this is 100% native landscaping habitat 100%. Inside the city. So okay. There's no farm or agriculture anywhere. So
then yeah, I would recommend calling someone to have them relocated or moved.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so do you want me to cover a few of the questions in the chat?
Sure, yeah.
Carol Bornstein asked a question about bees associated with annuals as opposed to perennials.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, was that Carol? It was someone else. Oh, it was Richard Brockman asked that. Do you think specific bees around Los Angeles might be specifically associated with annual flowers, flowers that may only be around for a few weeks in bloom? Seems
Yes.
like, okay.
Oh, sorry. Keep going.
Okay.
Sorry.
Then another,
Oh, yeah.
somebody asked, there's a type of bee that is very tiny. It looks like a gnat. Would you know what that? Little tiny ones that look like gnats.
If they have a photo or like a coloration, because there's a lot of bees that a lot of people confuse for gnats.
They're black. And I don't have a photo, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Do you know if they potentially have white stripes on their or white or yellowish stripes on their face?
I haven't picked that up, but they're so tiny.
Okay, because I mean, there's a very small bee called a Hylaeus. Actually, do you mind if I share screen again?
No, go ahead.
Let me, because I don't think I put any Hylaeus in my presentation, but so Hylaeus would definitely be one of them, which is one of those bees that actually does not collect pollen, but it's not a cuckoo bee. There's also this bee, which is the small carpenter bee. So this is a Ceratina arizonensis. There's also a larger version of the small carpenter bee, which looks almost exactly the same, except it doesn't have blue eyes. It's called a Xandontomeris. That could be one. Do you know what plant it's visiting?
I usually see it on my patio. The only plant I know that's popular, I have a Baja fairy duster, and I also have some sages.
Okay. The sage would attract a lot of different plants. It could also be a perdita. Without a photo, there's just so many bees
Okay.
it could potentially be.
It's friendly, whatever it is. It comes right up and visits me a lot.
Oh, okay. That's great. You must be like a bee whisperer.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thank
Thank
you. If you do find photos, feel free to like email me or reach out later.
Okay, I'll try to take my camera next time and get a picture.
Okay, great.
Richard raised his hand.
Yeah, sorry, Krystle. I just wanted to ask my question instead of just in the chat. So there are bees that are specialized to like annual plants around Los Angeles. Are there a lot of them? Is that like a common strategy? Because you'd think like you'd have to line up your life cycle like really tightly with these annuals, right? And then you mentioned that one with the poppy and the cryptantha. Is that an example of one that's
real? There's a lot of bees that will just only be present for even like so an example of one that I still haven't seen, even though it's a very common bee. It's called a Halictus tripartitus. So the female you'll see a lot, but the male is so closely lined up that I don't even know how long it's actually present. Like a lot of times it's supposed to be end of summer, beginning of fall, but you just like their timing is so specific with these plants. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, another question. Why is it that those male bees are sleeping in flowers and not the females? What's going on?
Yeah, so typically, not all the time, but typically males don't sleep in burrows or any sort of cavity with the females. Like an exception would be like a carpenter bee that'll sleep in some of the nesting cavities with females. Also, there's a few bees on Santa Rosa Island. But the burrows, the purpose of those is for creating future generations. So females will create burrows to lay an egg in, put some pollen in, and just use it as a place to, again, raise their young. Male bees don't do that. The only purpose they have is to mate. So they, a lot of times when they have these symbiotic relationships with these plants, you'll find that it's the plant specifically that the female visits. So they just have a very tight life cycle that's just completely wrapped around that plant so they can keep continuing their generation. So yeah, there's no reason for them to really be in a burrow.
Another question, if you have a great natural habitat in your yard, you know, lots of leaf litter and everything, why would you need a bee house?
You don't. I feel like people like them, which is a reason why a lot of people have them. And I feel like a lot of the promotion is, oh, we need to do something to help the bees, or we need to give them an environment to live in. But there's also not a lot of understanding that like a natural ecosystem or a naturally like sort of mimic ecosystem in your backyard will do that. So there's really no reason to actually have a bee house, but a lot of people like them.
Do you have any bee books that you recommend for people for their?
Yeah, I actually put some by me and completely forgot to mention them before. So I'll start with, so my very first bee book, which I think is a great one to start out with, is called The Bees in Your Backyard, which is this book. There's a Western version that came out, I think last year. There's the Eastern one came out last year. The Western one was supposed to come out this year. I think it's coming out next year. One of my friends was actually the one people who wrote this, but I'd say this is like the bee book to start with. It'll get you really familiar with the bee families, the reason behind their names, what to attract them, things like that. If you're a little bit farther along with bees, this book is a little bit more complex. I don't know why they put a honeybee on the front. It's not about honeybees, but maybe people were just more attracted to it. But it's called The Bees of the World. This is the second edition. It's by Charles Michener. So really intense book. And this is not a book that you read through, but it's very scientific heavy. Also, we have California Bees and Blossoms, a guide for gardeners and naturalists. This is by Gordon Franke. Also Robin Thorpe. Robin Thorpe was the last person to see the Bombus franklini, which is that bumblebee that hasn't been seen since 2006, but he actually passed away recently. Also Roland Coville and Barbara Etter. And then I have one more book that I think is really good for kids. So this was written by Joe Wilson, which is one of the co-authors for the Bees in Your Backyard book. It's called Bees Are the Best. So this is great for kids, and it explains native bees to them in just like such a simple way. It's a really beautiful book as well.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
As somebody mentioned, and maybe you skipped over this, but keeping bare soil in your garden.
Yeah. So most bees, about 70%, are ground nesting. So bare soil is super, super important for ground nesting bees. I don't really know what to expand on that, but yeah, definitely have bare soil in your yard. Also too, I feel like a lot of times in just like, if you just kind of create like a native ecosystem, you'll naturally have bare spots in your yard, which are really great for plants, for bees. Yeah.
Someone asked, do you have calendars for sale?
I've sold out twice, and people keep asking me for more as soon as I sell out again. If you could reach out to me on Instagram or maybe email me if you want a calendar, because I'm still getting them to people before Christmas. I just did another mailer today. So yeah.
Is it through BSIP?
They were originally, the first one was through Theodore Payne, and the second one I actually did myself. But yeah, you can go to bsip.com, and the shop tab is closed now because the calendars are all sold out. But if you just contact me from there or Instagram and BSIP, I'll get you some.
Is iNaturalist, here's another question, is iNaturalist the best way to ID native bees?
I feel like that's really subjective, but it is a very, very good way to ID native bees. There's also native bee groups. There's one called the Bee Inventory Monitoring Lab, or BIML for short. There's also a very, very complicated website called Discover Life. There's the Native Bee Society on Facebook will help you out as well. Yeah, I feel like the Bees in Your Backyard book as well is a really good resource to use alongside iNaturalist, because it can get kind of complicated. But yeah, I would recommend just trying to get to family first and then getting to the genus, because a lot of times it's kind of hard to get past that.
This isn't a question, but Bonnie Benson of UCLA said she has a team of students in a 2-quarter sustainability research class at UCLA working on native bee study for the UCLA campus starting in January.
Oh, that's amazing.
Just to let you know that that is going on.
Oh, no, I had no idea. That's really cool.
Okay.
Awesome, Bonnie.
Were there any questions that I skipped over or somehow missed, or does anybody want to ask a question in person? Mary Montes?
Hi. So I have this large Palo Verde tree in my backyard.
Yeah.
And every spring it's covered in yellow flowers, and I get like hundreds of those big black, I think they're carpenter bees.
Mm-hmm.
And they just swarm that tree. You can hear them from everywhere. And then when the tree is done flowering, they all disappear, and I don't see them till the next year. And I'm just wondering, where do they go? How do they make a living after the Palo Verde trees are all done?
Yeah, so carpenter bees are actually one of the longer living bees. So they can actually live for like a year or 2 years. So they might actually be traveling around to different locations. But also I would look for like, they really love like fence posts too. They might just be spending some time like hibernating in there as well, but they'll return to the same area every year. But yeah, they love flowering trees. So I check your neighbors too. They might just be rotating between yards, because a lot of carpenter bees are still out right now.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if that was too vague, but yeah.
Oh, no, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, great.
And Bonnie Benson of UCLA actually has her hand raised. So Bonnie, you want to?
Yes, thank you. Because I didn't catch the name of the bee house that you were suggesting, and I want to get some ordered so that my students can install them, so we can kind of have a visual for them to work.
So it's called We Bee House, and it's WEEBEE, then house.
And somebody else, Ashley asked a question. So with regards to leaving soil exposed, what about mulching? Should we just not mulch a certain section or just around the base of the plants?
I guess like a follow-up question to that, by mulch, does she mean shredded leaves, or is it putting down like wood chips? I don't know if she's can answer that. Either. Okay. So I've started to see some bees adapt to wood chips. Like the green bees, the Agapostemon, I've seen them sort of actually create burrows within them. But yeah, personally, I think the best way to mulch is with leaves, just because leaves aren't sort of, I guess, barren of nutrients for the soil, for your plants. And they don't also, like wood mulch, or a lot of like people use plastic mulch, things like that. It's kind of hard for creatures to breathe below them. So yeah, I would just be kind of picky with the mulch you use, like as natural as possible.
Lola has her hand up.
Hi, Krystle. I love your work. Thank you for sharing so much today. I had a question. So at my community garden in El Sereno, I found 3 ground nesting bees.
Mhm.
And so I kind of stopped watering in that area. I was really careful not to water over their holes or their entrances. And I was just wondering what you recommend, because I have a whole bunch of like native flowers popping up, but I'm a little nervous that, I don't know, maybe overwatering. I know ground nesting bees do a really good job of keeping how the mom keeps the nest really protected from moisture and bacteria and fungi, or I'm not sure about the part, but about moisture. So I was just curious what you recommend, because
Yeah.
I think we're going to be living there now.
Yeah, so ground nesting bees, they can cohabitat with people a lot with the watering or disturbing the ground. So I guess one thing I'll say about watering is female bees will typically, and I can't remember what it's called at the moment, but they'll line their nests with a waterproof antibacterial sort of film that will keep everything waterproof and keep the bacteria really low. It's actually something that people are looking at to maybe create as like a plastic alternative. Specifically the ones from like cellophane bees or plastier bees. So yeah, I mean, honestly, like if you do disturb them, a lot of times they will, I have seen them just get annoyed, but they'll recreate the entrance to their burrow. A lot of them, like a lot of agapostemon actually will, not a lot, a few agapostemon will actually close the entrance to their burrow when they are either just inside there doing whatever they're doing or when they're outside of it. So a lot of times the burrows will actually be protected really well, not just by agapostemon, but by other bees as well. So I would recommend keep gardening. You probably will just destroy some nests or disturb some nests, but bees can be really resilient.
Okay, cool. That's amazing. Also, the plot next to mine also has 2 entrances for, I'm not sure what type of bees they are, but they have multiple bees going inside. I want to say I counted about like 30 at least.
Oh, okay.
I want to say they're sweat bees, I think. But I know he was also curious, since it's going to be time to begin putting in vegetables in the ground. He was kind of curious if he should leave like, I don't know, about like a foot diameter. Like, I guess I'm trying to imagine what their home looks like underneath.
Yeah. So are you saying they're, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Are you saying they're using one entrance?
Yeah. One, well, there's two entrances. But in one entrance, I counted about 30 bees going inside. I know sometimes they live like in a little community in a way.
Yeah.
They share.
So, yeah, that's interesting. I probably would want to see a photo of those bees because if they are sweat bees like Halictus or Lassia blossom, some of them are solitary, some of them are like sort of semi-social where there's maybe like 2 to 4, I would say, in a colony, but like 30 is a lot. So that makes me wonder if maybe it is a bee that you're seeing. It could be wasp, maybe.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I don't know. But as far as nesting, that's something that I have just started to get into. So I can't really answer like very good questions for that. But I will say if you do open up a nest in winter on accident, just like with the Weeby house, they have like a little like cubby that you can put the cocoons in. I would just do the same thing. Like maybe create like a little cubby or something that you just leave outside and just put the cocoons in there. And then when it's time for them to eclose, they'll do it naturally. But yeah, if you have pictures of what is coming and going, because it doesn't really sound like bees, but it might be, but I don't think so.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
There's another question. What about ground nesting bees in areas where people or animals may be walking? Should you just watch your step, or you need to be super careful, or what?
Yeah, so a lot of ground nesting bees really like hard, compact soil, which is where like with the Mishimoka Trailhead, that parking lot, people just drive over it all the time. The bees keep coming back. Yeah, I would say be careful. But again, the bees are pretty resourceful. So they'll rebuild their turrets if they have them. They'll rebuild their nest. I'd say unless you're going through with like a tractor, like digging deep into the soil, I would say they would probably persistently keep coming back and keep rebuilding. They might have, if you do keep destroying their, like, I guess like an example with the diadacia bees that build the turrets. So the reason they build those turrets is to protect their burrows, like their young, from being parasitized by not necessarily other bees, but like wasps, or there's a lot of flies that will just like toss their eggs down their burrow. So you could potentially be destroying those, which might mean that there's more parasites next year than bees. But I mean, there's kind of a lot of like, this could happen or that. So it's not really a definitive answer, just a lot of stuff could potentially happen.
Someone is asking about the photographic equipment that you've found useful for photographing native bees.
Oh, okay. Actually, okay. I don't know if you guys can see this. So this is my camera. It's a Nikon D500. That's the body. And right now what I have on it is a Laowa lens, which I think is a 15 millimeter. So this is a wide angle macro. So it photographs the insect or the flower, but it also gets the full background as well. I also shoot with a Nikkor 105, which is my standard lens. I like that one because like the 105 is basically how many millimeters from the back of the lens to the subject that you could shoot. So 105 gives you a lot of working distance because insects move around a lot. I use 2 diopters on that, which are basically magnifying glasses. So one's called a Raynox 150, and the 150 is for shooting just like the body of the insect and maybe the flower that it's on. And then the 250, you can just get like a face shot. And then I also have a Laowa 25 millimeter, which is 2 to 5 times ultra macro. And that's the one that I use for insects that are like 5 millimeters and below. So I use that for like the thrips, the Perdita minima, which is potentially the world's smallest bee. A lot of really, really tiny things. But yeah, I like the D500 because it's a crop sensor instead of a full frame. But I think with like the newer cameras that came out, you could shoot full frame and it's like the same quality. Also, D500 is discontinued now, just happened this year. The Z9 is a really good camera. Sony also has, I feel like, some of the best cameras out now. Always when you're shooting macro, I recommend a flash. I use a Godox. And then I also have this is like a lens hood for diffusion. I got this from Cygnus Tech, which is CYGNUS. So basically when you're using a flash, you get hot spots, which is basically like a white spot with 0 information on it. So when you put a diffuser on it, it spreads out the flash and softens everything. So you don't have those white spots. And if you do want to edit, like in RAW, you can later. Yeah.
Great. Are there any other questions? I think I covered. Lily, did you?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Yeah, so first of all, just this presentation has been super cool, so thank you. I have kind of like a 2-part question. So I've been really passionate about science since I was a little kid. But right now I'm really struggling to do school because of chronic health issues. And I just am worried that like maybe I'm not going to be able to get involved in the community without a degree. So my first question is kind of just like, how necessary do you think it is to have a degree to get involved in the community? And then also, how do you like find resources to get more involved? Like, how did you start out? Where do I look to learn more, to meet people, to join activities, stuff like that? I just really am struggling to like find stuff in LA.
Yeah, definitely understandable. Definitely. I don't think it's important at all to have a degree in any field of ecology. I don't hold one in ecology. It's just mainly interest. that kind of propelled me forward. And then also like, so the first book that I had was the Bees in Your Backyard book. And I saw the names of the authors on there. So I just reached out to one of them. And specifically in the bee world, I'd say people are just very, very willing to share information, to look at your pictures, to talk to you. And especially on the West Coast, because there's so, for whatever reason, there's less melittologists on the West Coast than anywhere else. So it's so much easier to just accidentally make discoveries just because there's so few people looking. So you can make a discovery even in your backyard, like a behavior, like the Perdita interrupta bee that I was talking about in Paloma's yard. No one's seen a burrow. So if you have that bee in your yard, you're just sitting out there for like a month, what are the odds that you'll find a burrow? So yeah, you can make contributions. You don't need to go to school or go into debt to do this at all. And I forgot the second half of your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. Just basically, I'm just like trying to figure out how to get more involved in the science community. And I'm just really struggling to find resources for that.
Yeah, honestly, I would just reach out to people. Like if you see an author of a book that you like, I'm not even joking, just like reach out to them. If you're on iNaturalist and you see a certain person is IDing your whatever organism, just reach out to them. You can reach out to me as well. I can put you in contact with people if you see something like this is your area that you kind of naturally are attracted to. There's so many people that are just so willing to talk to you about what they love. Yeah, just basically reaching out.
Okay,
and also,
thank you.
You don't need a camera either. You could use your cell phone to take pictures too.
Yeah, I'm definitely more into like the ecology side of things. Like I'm not, I want to be more artistic, but at this moment I'm not. And it's really just like the knowledge aspect of it. I love learning, discussing with people. So that's definitely really helpful. So thank you.
No problem.
A comment is so many, so much goes on in Los Angeles. I don't know if you're in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So, you know, I
am
about LA, and there's always the Natural History Museum has a great community scientist program. They're always running things, programs. I think this spring they'll be doing their City Nature Challenge again.
Oh.
And that's outreach to the ordinary folks to go out, and so you might check with the Natural History Museum.
That's a good idea.
And
yeah, that's definitely helpful.
Yeah, I know I haven't gotten involved in that directly myself, but every year that they I think it's 2 cities challenge each other, San Francisco versus Los Angeles. And there's like a 24-hour period or a weekend or something to see who can identify the most, which city can identify the most nature.
Oh, that's really cool.
And it is all ages, all levels of people, but it is really community science. And Carol Bornstein, who is retired recently has her hand up from the Natural History Museum. Carol, can you comment? Carol, you want to unmute yourself?
There we go.
Okay.
The City Nature Challenge started being a contest between LA and San Francisco, but it is now global. I don't know if they did it this past year or not, but a few years ago, it became an international activity, and people from all over the world were going out and surveying wildlife and plants, including plants, and documenting.
Yeah, I think it's gone up to like 100-something countries. Yeah, it's grown enormously.
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, Nari.
Hi.
Yeah, it's a fun project. It's a lot of work, but to actually verify a lot of the submissions that come in, but it's become quite a phenomenon.
But you would agree that that would be a way for a person to get involved.
Yes, definitely. Yep.
Ecology, environmental things.
Yes.
Someone is asking, can they reach out to Krystle to come over and photograph the bees? I lost the thread here, sorry. We have ground drilling bees that hover over a patch of ground in our parkway in May, probably courtship behavior. Can we contact you to come over to photograph them at that time?
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a yes. And here's another. Is there a kind of bee that goes to the honey locust tree in the spring? They just buzz with bees.
Yeah, there'd be quite a few that would. I guess it's really hard to ID unless it's like a specific species of flower that this bee has a symbiotic relationship with. So without like a photo, I wouldn't know what it was, but that could attract a lot of different bees. It could even be honeybees.
Okay. And, I did mention the Natural History Museum and the Nature Challenge. Our hikes for the CNPS chapter, that if you want to learn plants, that's come to one of our hikes. And the fungus hike should be very eye-opening. January 28th at Eaton Canyon. Sometimes these hikes, it's going to be amazing what you see, especially if we keep having, these rains every once in a while.
Yeah.
It's right there. We'll see beautiful things. Any other questions? Anything I missed? I think I caught all the questions in the chat. Well, Krystle, most of the things, the comments have been coming through the chat as being saying, thank you. And it has been very eye-opening and very informative on what's out there if we just open our eyes. One of the problems that I personally have with those native bees, they are so teeny and they are so fast.
Yeah, they're really fast.
You have them, but they're not like some big bungling European honeybee. They're usually doing their own thing and they're doing it quickly. So I admire that you were able to capture so many of the beautiful pictures that you had. So
it takes a while, but yeah, thanks.
So I want to thank everybody for showing up. It's been totally amazing. And I guess we'll see you the next time. Thank you so much, Krystle.
Great, thank you.
Hope to see you at a hike.
I'm gonna go to the Eaton one.
Okay. There should be a lot of stuff starting to bloom.
I'm excited.
Yeah. Okay, see you then. Bye-bye, guys. I'm going to end this session.